Lucille shimmered under the glow of crystal chandeliers, their light reflecting off polished silverware and gleaming wine glasses. The soft notes of a violin blended with the hushed murmurs of diners, business moguls, celebrities, and the city's elite. Amelia, dressed in a simple black uniform, moved gracefully between tables, balancing a tray of red wine. Her smile remained flawless, but behind her eyes hid a weariness no one noticed. Amelia, 25, was used to long night shifts at Lucille. She worked tirelessly from sunset to dawn just to earn enough to support her mother and younger sister, and to chip away at the millions of dollars in debt her father had left behind before vanishing. Once a respected businessman, he had gone bankrupt after a string of failed investments, leaving his family drowning in shame and debt. Amelia didn't blame him. She just wanted to forget him and protect what was left. Her mother, whose health was fading, and Lily, her 16-year-old sister, who still dreamed of college. Tonight, Lucille was busier than usual. Amelia moved through the crowd of unfamiliar faces, remembering every request. One guest wanted sugar-free wine, another demanded gluten-free dessert. She worked like a machine, letting no emotion slip through. But when she approached table 12, she felt a chill in the air. The man sitting alone radiated a presence so powerful, no one dared approach. Lucian Vale, 32, tech billionaire, and the city's most talked-about name in both business articles and gossip columns. Tonight he wore a black suit, his hair sleekly combed, but his eyes were as sharp and cold as blades. On the table, an untouched glass of whiskey sat beside a phone that kept lighting up. Lucian hadn't come to Lucille to dine. He had come to hide to escape the gawking stares and scathing headlines after Vivian, his fiancée, had called off their engagement right before the launch event of his company's new product. "Billionaire left at the altar," one tabloid had mocked. Lucian felt as though the entire world was laughing at him. He wasn't used to rejection. He wasn't used to losing control. And tonight, he just wanted a dark corner to swallow his anger. Unaware of the latest high society drama, Amelia approached his table with the extra bottle of red wine he'd ordered. She poured it carefully, professionally, but her hand trembled ever so slightly, a result of working 12 hours straight without a break. Just a moment of distraction, and the glass tilted, spilling a few drops of wine onto the sleeve of Lucian's suit, leaving a faint red stain. The world seemed to freeze. Lucian looked up, eyes flaring like fire. Amelia bowed slightly. "I'm very sorry, sir." He stood abruptly, his chair screeching against the wooden floor. "What the hell are you doing?" His voice cut like ice. "Do you have any idea how much this suit costs? Your entire month's salary wouldn't even cover it." Conversations around the restaurant halted. Curious eyes turned toward them. Staff at the bar exchanged anxious glances. Amelia felt the pressure from all directions, but she didn't lower her head. Instead, she took a deep breath, set the wine tray on the table, and looked Lucien straight in the eye. The eyes that were usually soft to hide her pain now blazed with quiet strength. "If yelling made you more powerful," she said calm and clear, "you wouldn't be sitting here alone tonight." The entire restaurant went still. The violin stopped mid-note, as if even the musician was stunned. A few guests gasped, one covered their mouth to hide a smile. Lucian, who often made seasoned negotiators tremble, stood speechless. He stared at Amelia, the small woman in a plain uniform, her eyes like a wall he couldn't break through. It wasn't defiance, it was truth, a truth he didn't want to face. Amelia didn't wait for his response. She bowed slightly, not submissively, but politely, and turned away, resuming her work as if nothing had happened. She carried the now empty tray back to the bar, her steps steady, even though her heart pounded. She knew she had just invited trouble. Lucian Vale was not the kind of man to be embarrassed without retaliation, but she didn't regret it. She'd lived her whole life under the weight of debt and humiliation, and she wasn't about to let a rich man crush what little pride she had left. Lucian sat down, fingers tightening around his whiskey glass. The stain on his sleeve no longer mattered. He wasn't angry anymore, he was stunned. For the first time in years, someone had spoken to him without fear or flattery. That girl with words as sharp as knives had hit exactly where it hurt, his loneliness. Vivian had left him not for love, but because she no longer saw value in him. And now, a nameless waitress had exposed it in front of everyone. He watched Amelia as she served another table, her smile back as if the confrontation had never happened. Who was she? Why had she dared say that? And why, even if just for a second, did he feel so small before her? Henri, Lacielle's manager, rushed over, apologizing profusely and offering compensation. But Lucien waved him off, his eyes still on Amelia. No need, he said, voice lower now. What's her name? Henri hesitated. Amelia, sir. Amelia Harper. She's a good worker, just a little clumsy tonight. Lucien didn't listen further. He nodded, stood, left a generous bill on the table, and walked out without looking back. But in his mind, her words echoed like a melody he couldn't forget. If yelling made you more powerful, you wouldn't be sitting here alone tonight. Back at the bar, Amelia exhaled as she saw Lucien leave. She had no idea that from that moment on, her life had veered onto a new path, one that Lucien Vale, with all his power and ice, would not let her walk away from so easily. You're watching Soul Stories, where every story whispers of love, healing, and hope. Let us know which city you're watching from. Don't forget to subscribe and be a part of our journey. Now stay with us. The story is just beginning. Lucien Vale's mansion perched high on a hillside, surrounded by towering glass panels that looked out over a city glittering with lights. Inside the vast living room, the only sound was the steady ticking of a grandfather clock, breaking the silence. Lucien, still in the same suit from Lacielle, sat on a leather chair, a glass of whiskey in his hand, untouched. His eyes, usually sharp and alert, were now clouded with something he couldn't name. The waitress's words, Amelia's words, echoed in his mind like a melody he couldn't turn off. If yelling made you more powerful, you wouldn't be sitting here alone tonight. Lucien Vale was a man who controlled everything from billion-dollar deals to the expressions of rivals in boardrooms. He had built his tech empire from nothing, rising from a childhood of lack and ridicule. But tonight, for the first time, he felt powerless. A waitress, a woman with nothing but a wrinkled uniform, had left him speechless in front of a crowd. She hadn't feared him. She hadn't trembled like the others. She had looked him in the eye and told the truth, the very truth he'd tried to bury, beneath layers of power. He stood suddenly, slamming the glass onto the table, whiskey spilling over the polished wood. He wasn't angry at Amelia, he was angry at himself. Why did that sentence haunt him so deeply? Why couldn't he forget the fire in her eyes like she had seen through him? Lucien walked to the window, staring down at the city below. Who is she? He muttered to himself, voice low and rough. His phone buzzed on the table, breaking the silence. Vivian lit up the screen. Lucien frowned, hesitated for a moment, then answered. Vivian's voice, sharp and confident, came through immediately. Lucien, I just wanted to make it crystal clear. I'm not coming back. The deal with your company tanked, my shares are worthless now. What do you think I'd stay for love? She let out a mocking laugh. Lucien clenched the phone, but his voice remained cold and calm. You made your choice, Vivian. I don't keep people who don't want to stay. He hung up before she could say more, tossing the phone onto the sofa. Vivian hadn't just left him, she had done it in front of the whole world, turning him into a public punchline. And now another woman, Amelia, had dared to challenge him, even if it was with just a single sentence. He couldn't let this continue. Lucien Vale didn't lose. Ever. He picked up the internal phone and called Marcus, his assistant, who was always on call, no matter the hour. Find out everything you can about a woman named Amelia Harper, he ordered, voice emotionless. She works at Lacielle. I want it all: family, background, finances, every detail. I want the file on my desk by morning. Though used to Lucien's unpredictable commands, Marcus still hesitated. Sir, is there an issue with her? Don't ask, Lucien cut him off. Just do it. When the call ended, Lucien sat at his desk, eyes scanning the framed items on the shelves, not family photos, but glowing articles about his success, awards he had won. But tonight, they meant nothing. He opened his laptop and typed Amelia Harper into the search bar, but nothing significant came up. No social media, no features, no trace. She was like a ghost, and that only made him more curious. How could someone so invisible shake him to his core? The next morning, Marcus arrived at the mansion holding a slim file. Amelia Harper, age 25, he began, placing the folder on Lucien's desk. She was a full scholarship law student at Stanford, but dropped out 3 years ago after her father, Richard Harper, went bankrupt. He owed millions to banks and private lenders, then disappeared. Amelia now works nights at Le Ciel and days at a cafe to pay off the debt. The total is close to $1 million, and the house her mother lives in is about to be foreclosed. Lucian flipped through the file, his eyes settling on the attached photo of Amelia in her Le Ciel uniform, a faint smile on her lips, exhaustion in her eyes. "Mother and sister," he murmured, reading a note. "They depend on her." "Correct," Marcus added. "Her mother, Eleanor, has a heart condition and can't work. Her sister, Lily, 16, is still in high school. Amelia is the sole provider." Lucian nodded and closed the file. An idea flickered in his mind, cold and sharp, like every plan he'd ever made. If Amelia was bold enough to challenge him, he would show her that no one crossed Lucian Vale without consequence. And this debt, nearly $1 million, was the key. He could control her, force her hand, and more importantly, prove to Vivian that he was never the one losing control. "Call the law firm," Lucian ordered, eyes still on the folder. "I want to purchase all of Richard Harper's debt. Use a third party. Keep my name out of it, as fast as possible." Marcus nodded, though his mind was full of questions. "Sir, what exactly do you plan to do with her?" Lucian didn't answer. He rose and walked to the window, watching the city wake beneath him. The plan was already forming. Amelia Harper would soon realize she wasn't just up against a billionaire, she had entered a game where he wrote the rules. He picked up her file again, his finger tracing her name in bold print. His gaze was icy, but deep inside, a spark of curiosity still burned. "You'll understand soon enough," he said, his voice low like a declaration of war. "No one challenges me." 1 week after the incident at Le Ciel, Amelia received a pristine, white envelope delivered directly to the restaurant's front desk. Inside was an invitation, gold lettering on thick, luxurious paper, requesting her presence at the Grand Meridian Hotel on Friday evening to meet with Lucian Vale. No explanation, just a single sentence. "We need to talk." Amelia frowned, tore the card in half, and tossed it into the trash. If Lucian thought a belated apology could smooth over her pride, he was sorely mistaken. She didn't need pity from an arrogant billionaire. Across the city on the 50th floor of Vale Enterprises, Lucian received Marcus's report that Amelia had rejected his invitation. He gripped the pen in his hand tightly, a mixture of irritation and fascination bubbling within him. No one refused him, especially not a waitress. "Who does she think she is?" he muttered, his eyes narrowing. But deep down, he couldn't deny it. Her defiance intrigued him. She wasn't like Vivian. She wasn't like anyone he had ever met, and he decided she would have no choice but to come to him. 2 days later, just as Amelia finished her shift at the cafe where she worked during the day, a sleek black Rolls-Royce pulled up in front. Marcus, dressed in a crisp suit, stepped out and calmly blocked her path. "Miss Harper, Mr. Vale would like to see you. The car is ready." Amelia crossed her arms, eyes wary. "I already said I'm not interested. If he wants to apologize, he can do it himself here." She turned to leave, but Marcus's voice made her stop. "This is about your father's debt." Amelia spun around, her heart pounding. "What did you say?" Marcus met her gaze, voice steady and serious. "Mr. Vale wants to discuss the debt of Mr. Richard Harper. You should come, Miss Harper. This is not a joke." Reluctantly, Amelia got into the car, her mind racing. She didn't know what Lucian wanted, but if it had anything to do with the debt that threatened her mother and sister, she couldn't ignore it. The car glided through the city's lit-up streets and delivered her to the Grand Meridian, where a private conference room had been arranged. Lucian was already there, dressed in a charcoal gray suit, flipping through a file. When she entered, he looked up, his expression unreadable. "You're hard to reach," Lucian said coolly, a hint of sarcasm in his voice. "Have a seat." Amelia didn't move. "Just say what you want." Lucian slid a document across the table toward her. "Marriage contract, 3 months. You'll be my wife, and I'll make sure your family keeps their home." Amelia stared at him, stunned. Then she let out a dry laugh, one that didn't reach her eyes. "Is this some kind of sick joke? What kind of person do you think I am?" Lucian didn't laugh. He opened the file and laid out the original debt documents in front of her glaring red numbers. her father's signature, and a foreclosure notice from the bank. "I've purchased the entire debt," he said, his voice as flat as a financial report. "Close to $1 million. If you don't sign the contract, your mother's house will be seized within 72 hours. Your mother, Eleanor, and your sister, Lily, will be out on the street. Is that what you want?" Amelia felt her blood freeze. She stared at the documents, each word like a blade carving into her. She wanted to scream, to throw the file in his face, but she couldn't. The numbers were real. The threat was real. And Lucien, with a faint smirk on his lips, held all the power. "Why?" she asked, voice trembling but steady. "Why are you doing this?" Lucien tilted his head slightly as if her question amused him. "Because I can, and because you intrigue me." Amelia clenched her fists, nails digging into her palms. She wanted to say no, to walk out of that room, but the image of her mother, frail in her hospital bed, and Lily, still dreaming of college, stopped her cold. She had no choice, not because she feared Lucien, but because she couldn't let her family fall apart. "Give me time," she said hoarsely. "One night," Lucien replied. "My lawyer will meet with you in the morning." Amelia left the hotel in a daze. That night, she didn't sleep. She sat by the window of her tiny apartment, staring out at the dark street below. The contract Marcus had handed her sat on the table. She read it over and over. Every clause felt like an iron chain. 3 months as his wife. No love. No emotion. Just a transaction. But in return, her family would be safe. The debt erased. She whispered to herself, "Just 3 months. I can survive this." The next morning, Amelia arrived at the law office Lucien had designated. She signed the contract, each stroke of the pen carving a fresh scar into her heart. The lawyer, a middle-aged man with an expressionless face, reviewed the papers and nodded. "Everything is complete, Miss Harper. Mr. Vale will contact you regarding the wedding." Amelia stood, her fingers clutching the copy of the contract. She stepped out into the morning sun, its light warming her face but not the cold inside her. Her eyes were resolute, but her heart was heavy. She didn't know what the next 3 months would bring, but she made a silent vow. Lucien Vale might own her debt, but he would never own her. The Grand Meridian Hotel, the epitome of luxury, was adorned in splendor for an event the entire city was buzzing about. The wedding of billionaire Lucien Vale. The grand ballroom overflowed with white roses and glittering chandeliers. Gold silk ribbons wrapped around marble columns, and a full symphony played soft sonatas. Outside, the media crowded in, camera flashes lighting up nonstop, eager to capture the so-called fairy tale romance that tabloids had hyped for weeks. But inside, the atmosphere was as cold and hollow as an empty cathedral. Amelia stood before the mirror in the bridal suite, wrapped in a custom-made white gown designed by a famous couturier hired by Lucien. The dress was beautiful, but to her it felt no different than another uniform, just another costume to play a part in Lucien's carefully scripted show. The makeup artist, a kind-eyed woman in her 50s, tried to make light conversation, but Amelia responded only with dull nods. She had no friends here, no family. Lucien had instructed her mother and sister not to attend, citing media safety as an excuse. But Amelia knew the real reason. He didn't want her to have any source of comfort today. She walked into the ballroom, eyes scanning the crowd. Faces she didn't recognize: Lucien's business partners, investors. A few well-known figures murmured among themselves, champagne flutes in hand. No one knew who she was. No one cared. To them, she was simply Lucien Vale's mystery bride, a convenient rumor to gossip about. Amelia tightened her grip on the bouquet of carnations and kept her back straight. She would not let them see her falter. Lucien stood at the end of the aisle in a jet-black tuxedo, his face as unreadable as ever. He didn't smile. He didn't offer the gentleness a groom should. As Amelia approached, his eyes slid over her, not with admiration, but with the detachment of someone inspecting merchandise. That only strengthened her resolve. She would not let him control her emotions. The ceremony moved quickly, like a deal being finalized. The officiant, a high-ranking government official, read the vows in a monotone. When it came time to exchange rings, Amelia looked at the sparkling diamond in Lucien's hand and shook her head. No need, she said quietly but firmly. A ripple of whispers ran through the crowd, but she didn't care. She simply signed the marriage certificate with a bold, unwavering hand, her way of stating clearly. This wasn't love. It was a contract. Lucien's brow furrowed, his hand still awkwardly holding the ring midair. Amelia's steely gaze unsettled him, though he refused to admit it. He had expected surrender, or at least a hint of fear, but she stood tall, as if he weren't the one holding her fate. He slipped the ring into his pocket and turned to the crowd with a forced smile. She prefers things simple, he said, voice raised just enough to smother the murmurs. But inside, a strange frustration simmered. The reception unfolded with hollow toasts and performative handshakes. Cameras flashed relentlessly, headlines already being typed. Billionaire Lucien Vale marries mystery woman in wedding of the century. Amelia stood beside him, a strange smile on her lips, her eyes hollow. She heard the praise, the admiration, but in her mind, only one truth rang clear. She was a product of this deal, traded for the safety of her mother and sister. Lucien wasn't enjoying himself either. He moved through the crowd with polite nods, his mind elsewhere. He had thought this wedding would be a triumph, a way to prove he was still in control after Vivian's public betrayal. But Amelia's piercing, defiant stare made him feel like he was losing. She didn't look at him like a wife, not even like a partner. She looked at him like an adversary. When the reception finally ended, they were escorted to the honeymoon suite, a lavish space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the entire city. Lucien walked in first, tossing his jacket onto a chair, his eyes still fixed on her. "You should feel lucky," he said, his tone tinged with mockery. "Not everyone gets to stand where you're standing." Amelia didn't respond. She stepped toward the window, gazing down at the city lights below. This was their wedding night, yet there was no love, no closeness. Just two strangers bound by paper and manipulation. She turned to him, her expression resolute. "I don't need your luck," she said, voice low but razor sharp. "I'm here for my family, not for you." Lucien opened his mouth as if to reply, then stopped. Without a word, he turned and left the room, leaving Amelia alone. She sat down in an armchair, tossing the now wilted bouquet onto the table. She looked out at the sprawling city once more, her heart heavy but her will unbroken. "I won't let him destroy me," she whispered to herself like a vow. 3 months. She would endure it, and when it was over, she would reclaim her freedom no matter the cost. Lucien Vale's mansion, perched atop a hill with sweeping views of the city, was a marvel of modern architecture, floor-to-ceiling glass walls, minimalist yet expensive furnishings, and vast open spaces where even footsteps seemed to echo. But to Amelia, it felt more like a luxurious prison. After the cold, sterile wedding at the Grand Meridian, she had moved in per the terms of the contract. From day one, she requested a separate bedroom in the East Wing far from Lucien's. He didn't argue, merely shrugged with detached indifference, as if her presence held no significance at all. Amelia's room was modest compared to the rest of the house, but she preferred its simplicity, a bed, a desk, and a window overlooking the garden. She brought a few personal belongings, a framed photo with her mother and sister Lily, an old law textbook from college, and a wool scarf her mother had knitted. These were her anchors, reminders that this life was temporary, that she did not belong to Lucien's world. Every day, Amelia kept to her routine. She woke early, slipping out of the mansion before Lucien stirred, and worked the morning shift at the cafe. In the evenings, she returned to Le Ciel, ignoring the curious glances of coworkers still abuzz with tabloid rumors about the wedding. She refused to touch a dime of Lucien's money, even though he'd left an unlimited credit card on her desk with a note. "Use if needed." Amelia shoved it into a drawer and never looked at it again. She owed him nothing more than what the contract required. On weekends, she visited her mother and sister in their small suburban home. Though the house was old, it was warm. Eleanor, her mother, frail from illness, always tried to prepare a simple meal for Amelia's visits. Lily, with her ponytail and bright smile, would chatter about school, her dream of becoming a doctor, and crack silly jokes that made Amelia laugh out loud. These moments were her medicine, the only thing keeping her sane inside Lucien's suffocating mansion. Lucien, meanwhile, had started to notice her, though he didn't want to admit it. He was used to people trying to manipulate him, partners, friends, lovers. But Amelia was different. She asked for nothing, never tried to flatter him, never sought his approval. She lived in his home like a ghost, quiet, independent, untouchable. He couldn't understand why she continued to work 2 jobs, even after he had erased her family's debt to save their house. What more does she need, he asked himself, equal parts annoyed and intrigued. One afternoon, Lucien returned to the mansion earlier than usual after a tense board meeting. As he entered the kitchen to grab a drink, he heard voices coming from the laundry room. He paused. It was Amelia speaking to Maria, the elderly housekeeper. Maria sat slumped on a chair, hand pressed to her abdomen. "Don't worry," Amelia said gently but firmly. "Sit and rest. I'll take you to the doctor. Just tell me where you keep your medicine." Lucien lingered outside the door, peering through the crack. Amelia was folding towels, her hands quick but unhurried. Maria shook her head weakly. "Miss Amelia, you don't have to. I just need a minute." "No," Amelia interrupted, her voice leaving no room for argument. "You've had stomach pain all week. I'm calling a taxi and I'm going with you. Don't argue, you won't win." She smiled, a warm, kind smile Lucien had never seen before. Maria chuckled softly and nodded. Lucien stepped away quietly before they noticed him, but the image burned into his mind. He had thought Amelia was cold, guarded, and standoffish. But the girl in the laundry room was kind, attentive, ready to help a woman she barely knew. She wasn't performing. She wasn't trying to win points. She helped because that was who she was. For the first time, Lucien felt a flicker of admiration, though he quickly tried to extinguish it. "She's just part of the contract," he reminded himself. But the voice in his head no longer sounded so sure. A few days later, Lucien caught sight of Amelia in the living room, video calling her sister. She was curled up on the couch, smiling radiantly as Lily told her about a high test score. "I told you, you're 10 times smarter than me," Amelia teased, her voice full of warmth. "Keep working hard, college is waiting." Lily laughed and said something that made Amelia pause. "No, I'm fine," she replied softly. "I'm just working a lot, that's all. How's Mom?" Lucien stood halfway up the stairs, pretending to check his phone, but really listening. That's when he realized Amelia had never told her family about the marriage contract. She hid everything from the mansion to the pressure she was under. She didn't want her mother or sister to worry, even though she was carrying the weight of their future alone. A strange feeling bloomed in him, not anger, not curiosity, but something closer to guilt and respect. When Amelia ended the call and stood up, she didn't see Lucien. She smoothed her hair and let out a tired breath. The smile disappeared, revealing the exhaustion she always kept hidden. Lucien watched her walk away, his chest tightening. He had forced her into this marriage, thinking she would eventually bend or try to manipulate him like so many others. But she didn't. She lived in his house, but her soul belonged elsewhere, a world of sacrifice, love, and quiet resilience. Lucien stepped out onto the balcony, gazing down at the moonlit garden. The image of Amelia laughing with her sister replayed in his mind so vivid, he couldn't shake it. For the first time, he asked himself, who is she really? Not the waitress who stood up to him, not the bride in a contract, but Amelia Harper, the woman behind those defiant eyes. And he knew, whether he liked it or not, that question wasn't going to leave him alone. Still following the story? If this story found you outside of Soul Stories, we invite you home to where every touching tale begins with truth, hope, and heart. The gala at the Imperial Hotel, one of the year's most prestigious social events, was a stage for the city's elite to flaunt their power and alliances. The grand ballroom shimmered under crystal chandeliers. Designer gowns swept across the floor, and laughter rang out over clinking champagne glasses. Amelia, in a deep sapphire silk gown Lucien had arranged for her, entered on his arm, her hand lightly resting on his part of the carefully rehearsed happy couple act the contract demanded. She was uncomfortable, but she knew she had to uphold Lucien's public image, at least for tonight. Lucien, dressed in a sharp black tuxedo, moved through the crowd with his usual cold confidence. He shook hands with investors, exchanged polite words with partners, and occasionally introduced Amelia with a neutral, "my wife," as though reading a line off a script. Amelia smiled at the right times, answered questions with polite grace, But her eyes remained distant. She didn't belong in this world, and she had no desire to. Midway through the evening, Amelia spotted a familiar face near the bar. It was Ethan, a former co-worker from the cafe she had worked at before joining Le Ciel. With tousled curls and a friendly grin, Ethan waved at her. "Amelia? Oh, wow, it's been forever," he exclaimed, approaching with cheerful energy. Amelia smiled genuinely for the first time that night. "Ethan, what are you doing here?" "Just working," he said with a shrug, motioning to the tray of drinks in his hand. "And you, rumor has it, you married a billionaire?" He raised an eyebrow teasingly, though there was no malice in his tone. Amelia chuckled and shook her head. "Don't believe everything the tabloids say. It's complicated." They chatted for a few minutes, reminiscing about cafe shifts, burnt cappuccinos, and cranky customers. Amelia's laugh was warm, natural, the kind she rarely let escape within Lucien's mansion. From across the ballroom, Lucien, deep in conversation with a group of businessmen, glanced in Amelia's direction. He saw her laughing, her eyes alight as she spoke with a stranger. His hand tightened around his champagne glass, an unfamiliar heat rising in his chest. Jealousy? No, he told himself. He had no reason to be jealous. Amelia was just part of a contract, nothing more. But why couldn't he look away? Why did the smile she gave that man bother him so much? Without another thought, Lucien strode across the floor, slipped his arm around Amelia's waist, and pulled her close, cutting off her conversation with Ethan. "Excuse us. We need to talk," he said, voice low but sharp, and ushered her out into the hallway. Ethan blinked in surprise, about to protest, but Amelia gave him a small nod that she was okay. Then followed Lucien. The hallway was dim, lit only by soft sconces casting golden shadows. Lucien released her and turned to face her, his eyes blazing. "What were you doing?" he demanded, voice raised. "You're my wife, and you were openly flirting with another man in front of everyone. Are you trying to make me look like a fool?" Amelia stood still, stunned for a moment, but only a moment. Then she crossed her arms and looked him straight in the eye, unflinching. "You have power," she said, voice calm but cutting, "but you've never learned how to use it wisely. That man is an old co-worker. We were talking. If that threatens your pride, then the problem is yours, not mine." Her words landed like a slap. Lucien faltered, mouth open, but no words came out. The truth in what she said, that his reaction was more about his own insecurity than anything she had done, left him momentarily speechless. He looked at her, standing tall in that sapphire dress, her gaze firm but not cruel. For the first time, he realized he couldn't overpower her, no matter how much authority he held. He turned away without a word and walked toward the window at the end of the hall, his fists clenched at his sides. Amelia remained still, her heart racing not from fear, but from surprise. She had expected him to lash out, like at Le Ciel. But instead he had gone silent, and that silence, though cold, felt different, as if he was fighting something inside himself. She returned to the ballroom with a composed face, but her mind was spinning. Why did she feel a pang of sadness at Lucien's silence? He had forced her into this marriage, controlled her life with debt. So why, for one fleeting moment, had he seemed not like an enemy, but simply human? That night back at the mansion, Amelia went straight to her room and shut the door behind her. She sat on the edge of the bed, knees drawn up, eyes drifting to the window. The image of Lucien standing alone in the hallway replayed in her mind over and over. She told herself she didn't care, that he didn't deserve her sympathy, but deep down, a quiet question whispered. Was there something in him she hadn't seen yet? Was Lucien Vale more than just a powerful man? She shook her head, trying to push the thought away. "It's just a contract," she whispered aloud, as if to remind herself. But when the lights were off and she lay staring at the ceiling, she couldn't deny it. This confrontation had left something unexpected behind. Not anger, not fear, but a reluctant, unsettling curiosity about the real man behind the walls Lucien Vale had built. In the glass-walled office at the top floor of Vale Enterprises, Lucien sat alone, eyes fixed on the file Marcus had just delivered. It wasn't just another report, it was a deeper look into the past of Amelia Harper. Not just numbers and family circumstances, but the story of a woman who had once been a rising star before her world collapsed. The file detailed everything. Amelia, 25, had once received a full scholarship to Stanford University, majoring in law. Her professors had predicted she would become one of the top legal minds of her generation. Her academic record was flawless, page after page of perfect grades. But 3 years ago, when her father, Richard Harper, declared bankruptcy after a string of reckless loans, Amelia had walked away from it all. No explanation, no withdrawal forms. She simply disappeared, leaving behind a dream and stepping into a world of debt, responsibility, and survival. Lucian turned each page slowly, stopping at a copy of an old transcript, a flawless row of A-plus grades accompanied by a professor's note. Amelia Harper possesses a rare sharpness of mind and unshakable resolve. He frowned, trying to picture that version of her, not the waitress at Le Ciel, not the reluctant bride in his contract, but the woman who once dreamed of changing the world with her voice. He asked himself, what kind of strength does it take to keep going when life strips everything away? That night, in the stillness of the mansion, Lucian couldn't sleep. He stepped onto the balcony with a glass of whiskey, but his thoughts were far from the present. Images of Amelia stirred memories he had long buried. He thought back to his own childhood, an old crumbling house on the outskirts of town, his mother gone when he was just 10, leaving him with a drunken, volatile father. Lucian had learned to survive on his own by 15-odd jobs, saving every penny, promising himself he'd never be weak again. He had built his empire from that pain, but the scars never fully healed. Now he realized Amelia wasn't so different. Life had cornered them both, but where he had built walls of power and silence, she had chosen a different path. She didn't shut the world out. She worked 2 jobs, laughed with her sister, helped strangers like Maria, the housekeeper she had taken to the doctor. She didn't complain. She just kept going. For the first time, Lucian stopped seeing her as just a debt holder or the woman who challenged him at Le Ciel. He saw someone who had been deeply wounded and yet still chose kindness. One evening, returning home earlier than usual, Lucian heard Amelia's voice from the living room. She was on a video call with Lily. He paused at the top of the stairs, not intending to eavesdrop but unable to walk away. "I know, Lily. The exams are tough," Amelia said, her voice playful and reassuring. "But you're smart. I know you'll do great. Don't worry about the money, okay? Just study. I'll take care of it." There was a pause, then Lily must have asked something that caught Amelia off guard. "My dream?" Amelia echoed softly, then let out a quiet laugh tinged with sadness. "I wanted to be a lawyer, remember? To help people who don't have a voice, people like Mom, like you. But sometimes life doesn't go the way you plan. It's okay. What matters is you get to chase your dream." Lucian stood frozen, his heart tightening. He had never once wondered about her dreams, never stopped to think about what she had given up just to hold her family together. It wasn't just a mountain of debt she carried, it was their future, their hope, and he, through a contract, had trapped her in another cage. For the first time, guilt settled heavy in his chest. He stepped downstairs, intending to slip out unnoticed, but stopped near her door. The room had gone quiet. Amelia had ended the call. He raised his hand, tempted to knock. He wanted to say something, anything. An apology, perhaps, or just to ask if she was okay. But his hand hovered, then dropped. He, Lucian Vale, a man who had never apologized to anyone, didn't know how to begin. He feared her eyes, not because they accused, but because they saw through him, like at Le Ciel. Her honesty stripped him bare in a way no enemy ever had. So he walked away. Back in his room, Lucian lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, Amelia's voice echoing in his mind. "I wanted to help people who don't have a voice." Her quiet strength haunted him more than any threat ever could. She was no longer just a contract, no longer just a girl with a debt. She was someone who had endured the same kind of pain he had, yet she had chosen to remain soft, generous, and strong. That night, Lucian didn't sleep. He got up, opened his laptop, and typed Amelia Harper into the search bar again, not to investigate, but to find her. Anything more about who she was. A scholarship mention, a news article. But there was barely anything. Just a few lines from Stanford, nothing more. It was as if she had erased herself from the world, as though she didn't want to be remembered. And for the first time, Lucian felt a strange, unfamiliar ache, not for control, but for understanding. He didn't want to know her to manipulate her. He wanted to know who she really was, the woman quietly, steadily, changing the way he saw himself. The charity gala at Aurora Convention Center was a grand display of glamour, a place where the wealthy flaunted generosity like a designer accessory. Crystal chandeliers sparkled overhead, silk gowns swirled across marble floors, and the clinking of champagne glasses mingled with polished, performative laughter. Amelia, dressed in a long silver gown Lucian had chosen, stood beside him, playing the perfect wife as the contract dictated. She smiled when introduced, responded politely to questions, but her heart was far away, with her mother, her sister, and the life she had traded to protect them. Lucian, as always, was the center of attention. He moved effortlessly among donors, his voice calm and practiced, each word curated to reinforce his image, generous, composed, always in control. But every now and then, his eyes drifted to Amelia, not to monitor, but as if searching for something more. After weeks under the same roof, he no longer saw her as just the sharp-tongued waitress from Le Ciel. She carried wounds like his, and the quiet kindness she lived by made him feel small. Midway through the event, Amelia overheard a conversation that shattered her calm. Near the banquet table, a group of women whispered behind glittering clutches and champagne flutes. "She's Lucian Vale's wife?" one sneered. "A waitress climbing into bed with power? Please, she doesn't belong here." "She's probably just a passing distraction," another chimed in, voice sharp as glass. "Women like that always find a way to trap men like him. It's textbook manipulation." Amelia stood frozen, fingers tightening around her glass. She'd grown used to whispers, but tonight the words pierced deeper, sharp needles jabbing at her last shreds of dignity. They weren't wrong, not entirely. She wasn't Lucian's wife in the way they imagined. She was part of a deal, a bargain, but knowing that didn't soften the sting. The pressure of the room closed in around her, crushing. She slipped away quietly, exiting to the back terrace without drawing attention. Rain had begun to fall, soft at first, then heavier, soaking into the ground and her skin. She stood beneath a tree, not seeking shelter, letting the cold rain wash over her. Water ran down her face, but she didn't wipe it away. She closed her eyes and let it all fall, every word, every ache, every reminder that she didn't belong in Lucian Vale's world. Inside, Lucian was mid-conversation with a sponsor when he noticed Amelia was no longer at his side. His eyes scanned the room, sharp and swift, until a nearby staff member mentioned seeing her slip away after overhearing a particularly cruel exchange from the women near the buffet. Lucian didn't need to hear more. He left the ballroom without excuse, ignoring the puzzled stares and half-raised champagne glasses. A moment later, he found her standing alone in the rain, drenched from head to toe, silver gown clinging to her like second skin. She wasn't shivering. She didn't cry. She simply stood there, still and solitary, like rain was the only place she could breathe. He grabbed an umbrella from a nearby attendant and stepped outside. "Amelia," he said softly as he held the umbrella over her, his voice lacking its usual edge. She startled and turned. Her eyes, red-rimmed but proud, narrowed. "What are you doing here?" Lucian didn't answer right away. He studied her face, wet strands of hair, trembling lips she tried to still. A look in her eyes that wasn't fear, but deep, worn-out exhaustion. A pang stirred in his chest. He had trapped her in this life. She didn't deserve to be shamed for it. "You should come inside," he said, voice gentle but firm. "You'll catch a cold." Amelia turned away. "I don't need your concern," she said, hoarse from the chill. "I just need a minute." But Lucien didn't leave. He stepped closer, shifting the umbrella to cover her completely, even as his own shoulders began to soak. And then, without thinking, he reached out and pulled her into his arms. Amelia stiffened. Her hands rose in instinct, as if to push him away, but paused. His warmth pressed through the cold silk of her gown, and for a fleeting moment, the embrace didn't feel like power or control. It felt human. I don't know what's happening between us, Lucian murmured, his voice low, barely audible above the rain. But I know this. I want you to stay. She didn't respond, but she didn't pull away either. Amelia stood still in his arms, heart pounding not from confusion, but from something she hadn't felt in a long time. Sincerity. His words were clumsy. He wasn't trying to win a deal or assert authority. He wasn't the man who commanded boardrooms or owned debt. In this moment, under the rain, he was just a man, and she couldn't deny her heart stirred in response. They remained like that for a while, silent but not uncomfortable, wrapped in the sound of rain and the quiet ache of things unspoken. Lucian held the umbrella over her, his arm steady. Amelia let the droplets on her face blur with the emotion she hadn't allowed herself to feel. Eventually, Lucian let go, slowly, his eyes meeting hers, not cold, not guarded, but full of unspoken questions. "Thank you," Amelia said softly, her voice barely more than breath. Then she turned and walked back inside. Lucian stayed behind, still holding the umbrella, watching her retreating figure. Rain trickled down the side of his face, but he didn't move. For the first time in years, something inside him cracked open, just a little, and he knew with quiet certainty, Amelia Harper was becoming someone he couldn't walk away from. Lucian Vale's mansion, once cold and glass-bound like a fortress, was beginning to soften, warmed by the quiet moments unfolding between him and Amelia. Since the embrace in the rain at the charity gala, the invisible wall between them had cracked, revealing emotions both had long kept buried. They were no longer just two strangers, bound by contract, but two souls inching closer, uncertain yet drawn to each other. One evening, Amelia found Lucian in the living room, scrolling through a movie selection on the oversized screen. "You watch movies?" she asked, a hint of surprise in her voice. Lucian shrugged, the corner of his mouth lifting slightly. "Sometimes. You pick." Amelia chose the Notebook, knowing full well it could stir feelings she wasn't ready to face. They sat on opposite ends of the sofa, but as the film began, the space between them seemed to shrink. When the scene of Noah and Allie parting in the rain appeared, tears began to slip down Amelia's cheek. She wiped them quickly, hoping he wouldn't notice. But Lucian did. He said nothing. Instead, he gently reached over and guided her head onto his shoulder. His warmth startled her at first, but then she relaxed into it, letting herself melt into a rare sense of safety. "Don't tell anyone I cried during a movie," she whispered, her voice shaky. Lucian let out a quiet chuckle, low and soothing. "Your secret's safe with me." In that moment, something surged in him, pure, uncalculated love, unlike anything he'd ever known. But Amelia, even as she rested against him, felt a quiet unease creeping in. Does he truly love me, or is it just because I'm his wife on paper? Their shared moments became habit. They read together, Amelia with legal thrillers, Lucian with business strategy, and slowly began revealing pieces of their past. She spoke of how her mother taught her to knit, her voice soft with nostalgia. Lucien, who rarely opened up, admitted he once dreamed of becoming an astronaut before life pushed him to grow up too fast. With each exchange, they grew closer. Lucian admired her resilience, her quiet strength. He no longer saw the woman who had challenged him at Le Ciel, but the woman who had unknowingly illuminated the darkest corners of his life. His love deepened, wild, undeniable, and terrifying in its intensity. But Amelia, even as she recognized the sincerity in Lucien's eyes, couldn't silence the fear inside her. Every gentle look he gave her, every moment he made her laugh, came with a shadow. Would he love me if I wasn't the debt he rescued? Is this real, or just a lingering echo of power and possession? That question intensified the day Vivian arrived. Lucian's former fiancée swept into the mansion unannounced, her red dress bold, her golden hair polished to perfection, exuding entitlement. Amelia was arranging books on the shelf when she paused, alert. Vivian didn't acknowledge her, instead ordering the butler, "Get Lucian. I won't wait long." Lucian appeared, face stone cold. He signaled for Amelia to stay put, then led Vivian into a private room. Amelia tried to focus on the bookshelf, but couldn't tune out the voices drifting from behind the door. "Lucien, you don't need this charade," Vivian purred. "That waitress? Come on, I'm willing to come back, forget the shares, Forget the old contracts. We can start over. Amelia clenched the book in her hands, her heartbeat spiking. Would he go back to someone who belonged in his world? Lucian's voice broke through, low and firm. Vivian, you don't understand. I once forced someone to marry me. I'll never do that again, not with you, not with anyone. Silence, then Vivian's biting reply. You love her? That girl with nothing but debt? Lucian's response came swift and sharp. Leave, and don't come back. Amelia turned away, her emotions in a storm. But something shifted. Lucian had owned his mistake. He hadn't chosen familiarity or status. He had chosen integrity. Maybe even her. That night, to break the tension, Lucian suggested they make pizza. Amelia agreed, craving something light to ease the emotional weight. In the kitchen, laughter returned. Lucian clumsily spread flour everywhere. Amelia, playful, dabbed dough onto his nose and giggled. You look like a clown now. Lucian raised an eyebrow. Oh, really? He reached for the flour with mock seriousness. Amelia shrieked, darting around the island. But Lucian caught her from behind, arms encircling her waist, hands dusted in flour brushing her cheeks. They laughed, breathless. Then she turned still in his arms and the laughter faded. Their faces were close. Too close. Breath mingled, eyes locked. Lucian looked at her, his gaze intense, full of everything he couldn't say. He leaned in, slowly, and Amelia, though her heart faltered, didn't back away. Their kiss was soft, unsure, but electric. When they pulled apart, her cheeks flushed. There's flour all over me, she mumbled. Lucian gently wiped a spot from her nose, his voice low, tender. I'm not complaining. In that moment, love surged through him, unfiltered and overwhelming. It wasn't something he could control. It wasn't part of a contract. It was real. After dinner, they stood by the sink, washing dishes side by side. Amelia passed him a plate, and their fingers brushed. She looked up, met his gaze warm, sincere, steady. She smiled, radiant, bright, yet deep inside, doubt still lingered. Is this real love, or just a part of the role I was forced into? Lucian saw that smile and felt his heart tighten, full of love. But he had no idea she was still struggling with the very thing he thought they had overcome. Under the kitchen light, they stood closer than ever, but still separated by a shadow neither had dared to fully name, the contract and the pain it had built upon. You're watching Soul Stories exclusive to our channel. If you're still with us, drop a comment, we read and cherish them all. Subscribe to support more heartfelt, original stories. Thanks for being part of the Soul Stories family. 3 months like a fleeting dream had passed in the glass fortress that was Lucian Vale's mansion. What began with cold silence and transactional boundaries had blossomed into quiet dinners, clumsy pizza nights, shared books, and a hesitant kiss in a flour-dusted kitchen. Amelia had tried to deny it, but she knew she had fallen in love with Lucian, deeply, painfully. But the contract, like a curse, never stopped echoing in her heart. No matter how sincere his eyes, how tender his touch, she could never forget that it all began with a deal, a debt. What if Lucian only loved her because she had no choice but to be his? What if, without the contract, he would have never looked her way? When the final day arrived, Amelia made her decision not because she didn't love him, but because she needed to know that he truly did. At dawn, as the first light seeped through the mansion's tall windows, Amelia quietly packed her things. She took only what she needed: a few clothes, a framed photo of her family, and an old law textbook. She left behind everything Lucian had given her: the silver dress, the untouched credit card, as if they belonged to a life she no longer recognized. In her small room, once a gilded cage, now strangely hard to leave, she sat down at her desk and wrote a letter. Every word cut like a blade. Lucian, when I signed the contract, I thought these 3 months would be a challenge. But you showed me something else, not just the man who used power to corner me, but the man with a heart, with scars and with sincerity. For the first time in my life, I fell deeply in love. But I need to know if you would have chosen me if there hadn't been a broken engagement or a debt. I'm leaving not because I want to, but because I have to. I need to know our love wasn't born out of obligation. Thank you for showing me that I can still love. Amelia, She folded the letter, set it beside the keys to the mansion, and slipped out the door before anyone could notice. Amelia had prepared carefully. She'd been saving cash from extra shifts, turned off her phone, and arranged to stay with an old college friend, Sarah, in a small town hours away. She didn't want Lucian to find her, not out of spite, but because she needed time to face her own heart. Lucian woke late that morning, wrapped in a strange stillness. He walked downstairs, hoping to see Amelia curled on the couch with a book. But the house was silent. He called her name. No answer. When he stepped into her room, his heart dropped. The bed was neatly made. The drawers were empty. On the desk sat a letter. His hands trembled as he unfolded it. For the first time in my life, I fell deeply in love. Her words pierced through him like knives. Lucian had loved her, but he had never told her. He had assumed time would be enough, that actions would speak where words failed. Now he saw the truth. He had let her live in doubt, never assuring her that she was more than a deal, more than a debt. He clenched the letter, pain seizing his chest. He called her straight to voicemail. He tried again, nothing. He knew what he had to do. Meanwhile, Amelia stood at a quiet bus stop on the edge of the city. The rain came gently like a whisper. It clung to her hair, her coat, her lashes. A small suitcase rested by her side. She looked down the road, waiting. Her heart ached, raw and heavy. Leaving Lucian was the hardest thing she'd ever done, but it was the only way to find out if their love could survive without the strings of obligation. The bus pulled in. Its doors opened with a hiss. She hesitated, tears slipping down her cheeks. She wiped them away quickly. "Be strong," she whispered to herself. She stepped onto the bus, carrying her suitcase and her shattered heart. As the vehicle pulled away, she looked out the window. The city blurred behind the glass, swallowed by the rain. She didn't know what came next, but deep down she held on to one fragile hope. If it's real love, fate will bring us back. Back at the mansion, Lucian stood on the balcony, her letter crumpled in his fist. Below him, the city pulsed with life, but all he could feel was the hollowness of her absence. The silence she left behind was deafening. The ache of losing her consumed him, and for the first time in years, he didn't care about control. He only cared about her, and now he had to prove that what they had was real, before it was too late. A week after Amelia left the mansion, Lucian lived in a haze between dreaming and waking. The grand estate, once echoing with their laughter as they made pizza or watched movies, was now suffocatingly silent. Amelia's letter, with words that were heartfelt yet painful, lay on his desk, read and reread, until the paper wore thin. "For the first time, I've loved this deeply, but I don't know if you would have chosen me without the debt." Those words felt like an accusation, not against Amelia, but against himself, the man who had used power to bind her, making her doubt the love they had found. Lucian couldn't accept losing her. He had ordered Marcus and his team to search everywhere: train stations, nearby towns, even the cafes where Amelia had once worked, but she had vanished. The strength and intelligence he had once admired in her now became obstacles. Still, Lucian didn't give up. He realized that if he wanted a chance to win Amelia back, he had to truly set her free, not with words, but with action. He summoned his private attorney, Mr. Raymond, to the mansion one rainy morning. "Terminate all financial agreements related to Amelia Harper," Lucian commanded, his voice low but resolute. "Her father's debt, her mother's house, deed, everything. Erase it all, as if it never existed." Mr. Raymond, though surprised, asked no questions. Within 48 hours, every document linked to the debt was annulled. Amelia's mother's house was fully transferred to Mrs. Eleanor, with no ties remaining to Lucian or his firm. But Lucien knew that wasn't enough. He needed to tell Amelia that he loved her, not because of the debt, not because of the contract, but because of who she was. He wrote a letter not long, but filled with words he'd never dared to say. "Amelia, I was wrong to use the debt to keep you. I thought power could control everything, but I can't control my heart, and I don't want to control you. I've erased every financial tie. You're free, completely free. But if you still feel something for me, if you believe our love is real, come back. I no longer hold you. But if you choose me, please come back." Lucian. He didn't send the letter by mail or through Marcus. Instead, he personally went to Amelia's mother's small house in the suburbs, where he knew Amelia had once returned every weekend. Mrs. Eleanor, her face kind but weary, opened the door. "Mr. Vale," she said, surprised. Lucian bowed his head, a rare gesture for him. "I'm not here to intrude. I just ask you to give this letter to Amelia, if she returns." Mrs. Eleanor nodded, her eyes seeming to understand that this wasn't just a letter, it was a man's entire heart. Meanwhile, Amelia was staying with Sarah, a college friend, in a small town 3 hours from the city. She worked part-time at an old bookstore, trying to rebuild her life, but her heart remained with Lucian. Each night she remembered the kiss in the kitchen, the gentle look in his eyes when she cried over a movie. She wondered if leaving had been a mistake, but her pride wouldn't let her return without knowing his feelings for sure. One afternoon, Amelia came back to visit her mother and Lily. As she walked in, Mrs. Eleanor handed her an envelope, her eyes meaningful. "Someone came by," she said softly. Amelia opened the letter, her hands trembling as she recognized Lucian's handwriting. She read each line, tears falling silently. "I no longer hold you." The words shattered the wall she had built to protect herself. Lucian hadn't just ended the contract, he had returned her freedom, not with promises, but with actions. And he had asked her to come back not out of power, but out of love. Amelia sat in her childhood room, the letter in her hands, tears streaming down her face. She thought about the 3 months with Lucian, from their confrontation at Le Ciel, the embrace in the rain, to the kiss in the kitchen. She had loved him, and now she knew he loved her, not because of the debt, but because of who she was. After a day of reflection, she made her decision. She would go see him not because of pressure, but because her heart had made its choice. She returned to the city, arriving at Lucian's mansion on a misty evening. When he opened the door and saw her standing there, hair damp, eyes steady, his heart nearly stopped. "Amelia," he whispered, his voice trembling. She stepped inside, saying nothing at first, just looking at him, as if searching for the truth in his eyes. Then she spoke, her voice soft but sure. "I choose you not because of debt, but because I love you." Lucian stepped forward, pulling her into his arms, holding her tight as if afraid she might disappear again. Amelia wrapped her arms around him, for the first time feeling a love unburdened by contracts or debts. They stood there in the grand foyer of the mansion, rain falling outside. But inside, their hearts had become one. No more power, no more transactions, just two people who had found each other through wounds and hope. Amelia rested her head on Lucian's shoulder, feeling his warmth. "I was scared," she whispered, "afraid you only loved me because of the debt." Lucian shook his head, his voice low. "I love you because you're Amelia, the one who made me want to become a better man." They held each other, no more words needed, because in that moment, everything was said. Their love finally was completely free.